Let me share with you something I've been noticing lately, and it's kinda wild once you see it. Morning used to begin with a breath. Now, it begins with a screen. We wake up to numbers now, not to ourselves, not to a feeling, but to stats on a screen. Steps, unread messages, blood sugar, sleep score, whatever new metric the phone decides is important this morning. Before the sun even warms the sky, we've already checked how we performed at resting and where we rank against the hundred strangers we'll never meet. And yeah, it feels harmless, almost responsible, like you're leveling up. But the game has actually changed behind your back. Silence used to mean everything was fine. Now, one quiet moment, no buzz, no alert, and your chest tightens like you forgot something very important. Look around. People's eyes glued to their phones on buses and trains, or hunched at the table in cafes, food getting cold while thumbs keep scrolling. Even when you do meet a friend in person, they might still be half present. Eyes down, shoulders forward, that slouched posture we all pretend is normal now for some reason. We don't need a study to tell us heavy smartphone use is tied to more stress and worse sleep. We can actually feel how these dopamine bricks retrain our nervous systems, shorten our attention spans, and dictate what our day is even allowed to be about. Meanwhile, the real world, the one with the dirt and the wind and weather, quietly gets demoted to background texture. We were built to touch trees, to feel cold air sting our lungs, to know what the ground feels like under our feet, but somehow we've ended up living inside rectangles. Going outside becomes content. You pick the outfit, you think about the angle, you pick the sound that the algorithm likes this week. You end up performing your walk for some validation tokens online. Even nature is rebranded, not as our actual home anymore, but a luxury, repackaged and sold back to us as wellness. It's funny, Dante wrote this ages ago, but it feels like he was talking about us. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a dark wood, for the straight way had been lost. It feels like someone quietly describing the place we've drifted into without noticing. The tragic part isn't that we're lost, it's that most of us don't even notice the road is missing anymore. Somewhere along the way, we stopped listening to that small inner voice that used to say, "This feels right" or "This feels wrong," and we outsourced it to apps, calendars, influencers, whatever's popular or top rated. For most of human history, you weren't an individual the way we use that word now. You were your people. You were your village, your craft, your role at the table. Identity was woven into family and neighbors and shared work and feast days. You didn't wake up thinking, "How do I fix myself?" so much as, "What are we doing today?" The idea that you are a separate project, a miniature company that has to grow your personal brand and quarterly results, is actually very new. And of course, our brains are glitching under it. Psychologists have a name for one extreme version of this: vertical individualism. That mindset where you're constantly comparing yourself upward and downward, trying to outshine, to stand out, to win. And surprise, when we look across cultures, that whole "I must rise above the other" script is linked with higher anxiety and more depression. So climbing over each other all the time doesn't make people free. It just makes them chronically unsafe, even when nothing obvious is attacking them. There's another way to organize life: horizontal collectivism, where people are different but equal. No one is supposed to dominate or be crushed underneath. Your value shouldn't come from outperforming your friends. It should come from belonging with them. And when we look at those places, they find something embarrassingly simple. People tend to have higher self-esteem and lower depression, not because life is perfect, but because they're not forced to carry reality alone. If you think about your own life for a second, the proof is already in your memory. When did you actually feel okay? Not "I performed well today" okay, the kind that actually means something. It's the evenings cooking with someone, eating with people who would notice if you didn't show up. It's those stupid jokes that makes you cry with laughter. It's the conversation where you finally say the scary thing out loud and realize the other person already knows that feeling. Your nervous system has been trying to tell you all along, and it's backed up by research. The healthiest minds aren't found in the most polished individuals. They're found in people who are genuinely connected. Harvard has been running the longest study of adult development for more than 80 years, and they didn't find what you might expect. It wasn't social class, IQ, or even genetics that predicted health and happiness. It was the quality of relationships. Good relationships keep us happier and healthier. Being socially connected, having people to count on, and being someone they can count on protects us from mental and physical decline better than anything else. Other studies show that being socially disconnected raises your risk of premature death by up to 29%. We can run from this fact by self-optimizing all we like, but our bodies and our brains keep circling back to the same truth. Connection matters more than metrics. You see the same pattern in the so-called blue zones, the places where people regularly live into their 90s and beyond. And yes, they eat decently and move their bodies, but just as important as this, they belong. They're woven into something. Neighbors drop by, family still talks. They have roles, names, faces that matter. Their real metrics aren't step counts or heart rates. It's being expected, being missed, being needed. Try measuring that with an app. So if both the research and your own gut are quietly pointing in the same direction, toward connection, toward community, then we have to ask a harder question. Why does the world around us keep steering us back into the cult of the self? So let's talk about that. You're watching Theorem Noir. If you're here, the algorithm stopped working. Welcome to the thought you weren't supposed to have. Let's continue. What happens when even dying becomes part of a productivity system? Imagine a future where you don't need a doctor to end your life. You just climb inside a sleek capsule, press a button, breathe nitrogen, and then just slip away. It sounds like science fiction, but the prototypes already exist. In Canada today, the reality isn't far behind. In 2024, there were more than 22,000 requests for medical assistance in dying, and 16,499 people received it. 95% of those deaths were for people whose death was reasonably foreseeable. But even that statistic hides the stories of people who simply couldn't afford to go on. Take the case of a woman in Ontario whose joints were collapsing. She applied for MAiD after being denied affordable housing. She said she would choose to live if she could find a place she could afford, but the system signed off on her death anyway. Another Canadian woman, Deborah, has multiple chronic conditions and barely survives on disability payments. She says she may apply for MAiD because poverty makes continued existence impossible. These stories are extreme, but they reveal an uncomfortable truth. When the world refuses to take care of you while you're alive, it has no problem giving you a fast, quiet way out. We're told assisted dying laws are about compassion, about giving control back to suffering people. That's partially true. But the explosion of MAiD begs a harder question. Why are so many people suffering in the first place? Why does a wealthy country normalize self-assisted death while unaffordable housing, underfunded healthcare, and crushing poverty go unchecked? When a society begins to invest in suicide pods instead of social programs, it isn't compassion, it's surrender. It's a system admitting it cannot imagine a future where everyone gets to belong, so it offers a velvet-lined exit instead. If we step back, the willingness to let people slip away quietly makes more sense when you remember how most modern institutions see us. Long before we ever swipe a screen or consider an euthanasia pod, we enter a factory built to make us useful. Traditional schooling was not designed as a playground for curiosity. It was designed as a training center for predictable labor. As one education scholar notes, the goal of the standardized factory model curriculum is to produce a docile worker capable of adapting to 8 or 12-hour shifts. Obedience, repetition, and punctuality are rewarded. That training doesn't end when you graduate. Modern workplaces extend the same ethos. long hours, constant monitoring, mandatory enthusiasm. Flexibility usually means your employer can reach you at any hour. HR will send you mindfulness tips while your KPI dashboard quietly expands to include how much time you spend away from your desk. This is by design. Docile workers don't unionize, they don't occupy streets, and they certainly don't have the time or energy to challenge the systems that keep them overworked and undercared for. Look around at the messages you get every day. Track your water, log your steps, optimize your morning routine, maximize your output. Self-care is your responsibility. But what happens when you do all of that and still feel numb? In 2024, more than 1 in 4 Canadians rated their mental health as poor or fair. In Nova Scotia, the prevalence of mood or anxiety disorders is 13.9% higher than the national average. Among middle school and high school students in New Brunswick, reports of depression and anxiety exploded from 39% to 55.8% in just a few years. Those numbers are staggering, but they are usually presented without context, as if mental illness just appears out of nowhere. The context is hours of labor, insecure housing, precarious relationships, and a culture that measures human worth by productivity. The numbers are a map of a society that does not know how to rest. When this endless grind predictably burns people out, the solutions offered are in the same vein. Pills, apps, therapy sessions scheduled in your lunch break, and now, apparently, a self-service pod when you can press a button and not have to worry about tomorrow. Even our escapes have become part of the machine. We know that social media, video games, and porn are like the drugs of the 21st century. When you're too exhausted to participate in collective action or even to visit a friend, you can always scroll, click, or watch something online. Those platforms are designed to keep you docile too. They deliver just enough dopamine to keep you from noticing your isolation, while your despair becomes their business model. So when Canada or any other country starts expanding death as an option, we should ask whether compassion is being used as a cover for capitulation. MAiD was introduced for extreme cases, terminal cancer, unbearable pain. Now the law allows death for chronic conditions that are not terminal, and until recently was set to include mental illness before being delayed to 2027. That expansion, critics warn, risks shifting the definition of unbearable suffering from physical to social. When homelessness, disability, and poverty makes someone miserable, the answer should be to fix homelessness, disability support, and poverty, not to guide them into a pod. There is also an ideological danger. If our cultural narrative becomes some lives just aren't worth living, it won't stop with the most extreme cases. It teaches all of us that human value is conditional on health, on productivity, on being inexpensive to maintain. At that point, your devices are not measuring your health anymore, they're just measuring your worth. The notification on the screen that says, "Track your sleep better," becomes maybe you should just give up and sign up for a pod. This can happen faster than you would think. But of course, this video is not about shaming individuals who choose MAiD. It's about the systems that make that choice seem like the most rational one. A society that offers a suicide pod to a woman who can't find an affordable apartment is a society that has abandoned its duty to care. A job that fires you for taking a mental health break is a job designed to break you. An education system that turns curiosity into obedience is a factory, not a school. If we don't want soft exits to become the default solution for hard problems, we have to start at the root. We need to reimagine education so it produces citizens, not just workers. We need to build housing and healthcare systems that make poverty a problem to solve, not a reason to die. We need to stop asking overworked people to fix themselves and start fixing the conditions that are making them sick. And we need to remember something that our ancestors understood without needing a single study. There is nothing productive about letting people disappear. The purpose of a community is to catch those who fall, not to give them instructions on how to land. And let's switch lanes for a bit and talk about the part of us that has nothing to do with apps or productivity. It's the part the machine cannot reach. Let's talk about consciousness and what happens when we stop long enough to hear ourselves think. What if everything we've been measuring isn't the thing that matters at all? Close your eyes and think back to when you were small. Lying in grass, watching clouds change shape. No app, no clock. You weren't tracking your breaths or counting steps. You were just aware. That awareness, the simple, silent fact that you exist and can notice that you exist, is the one thing in your life that doesn't come from outside. It's also the one thing our culture never seems to be interested in. Most of modern science isn't actually sure what consciousness is. Ask a neuroscientist and you'll likely get a shrug. As one review notes, many neuroscientists assume consciousness simply emerges when enough neurons fire, relying on what critics call magical emergence. Others admit that all of the evidence we find, brainwaves, neural ensembles, chemical signatures, tell us nothing about why there is an inner experience at all. A few researchers even suggest that the brain's electromagnetic field might be even more fundamental than its neurons. In other words, our most precious power, the thing that allows every memory and every feeling, is basically uncharted territory. There's no fortune to be made in consciousness, so most of the attention and money goes elsewhere. That's convenient for systems that prefer you asleep. When your entire sense of self is built on external metrics, productivity, consumption, attention, the part of you that can be monetized goes quiet. And it's not just the hours you work. Look at your day. Commuting, cooking, cleaning, caring, scrolling, pushing yourself through workouts because your watch buzzed, grocery shopping, answering emails at 11 p.m., staying up to see which new crisis you need to understand to be a good citizen. Even rest has been turned into a competitive sport. We've built a culture that keeps you so busy maintaining the basics that there is no space left to explore what you actually are. The cost of that lost space shows up everywhere. Loneliness and social isolation have been linked to increased risk of heart disease, stroke, anxiety, depression, and dementia. Yet we still treat loneliness like a personal failure rather than a civic emergency. We design cities with few meeting places. We build lives that revolve around cars. We move for jobs and leave our support networks behind. We call this freedom. And still, something in us whispers that this is not what life is for. Think about the moments that have actually stayed with you. Not your highest productivity score, but the times when time seemed to stop. Watching a sunrise with someone you love. Singing badly in a kitchen with friends. Giving a stranger directions and ending up in a conversation for an hour. It's in those pauses that something like consciousness comes forward. Those moments don't scale, can't be optimized, and don't make anyone any money. They are also the only times most of us feel truly alive. Many traditions have long suspected that there is more to awareness than neurons. Whether you call it a soul, a field, a vibration, or just the witness, countless people describe a felt connection to something larger when they slow down enough to listen. Modern research might dismiss this as subjective, but subjective is literally what consciousness is. Maybe that's why the most radical act in a system that wants docile, distracted workers is to pay attention to your own experience. Paying attention isn't just meditation on a pillow. It's noticing when your body tenses at work and asking why. It's feeling the hollowness after another scroll binge and realizing it's not hunger for content, but hunger for contact. It's hearing your friend's voice and letting it interrupt your routine. It's listening to the idea that pops into your head while washing dishes and writing it down, even if there's no career path attached. It's remembering that your consciousness isn't a productivity app, It's the part of you that can still tell the difference between being busy and being alive. When you start taking yourself seriously at that level, something else happens. You start taking other people seriously too. If all of us are more than our metrics, then every person becomes more than their output, their diagnosis, or their bank account. Suddenly, the man mumbling to himself at the bus stop isn't an obstacle. He's a consciousness having a hard time. Suddenly, the friend who can't get out of bed isn't lazy. She's an awareness under siege by a system that profits off her exhaustion. Recognizing this can ignite a very different kind of activism, one that sees care not as charity, but as solidarity. And that's the main part of the story that I'd like to emphasize. Once enough people start seeing through the lies, the control structure starts to wobble. When you realize your value doesn't come from how many boxes you check, it becomes easier to refuse the boxes altogether. When you stop believing that success is buying things you don't need to impress people you don't know, you free up time and money to help someone else. Helping isn't just altruism, it's the cheapest, most reliable antidepressant we have. Studies show that volunteering and acts of kindness reduce anxiety and increase feelings of meaning far more than self-oriented activities ever do. In cultures where people regularly check in on neighbors and share resources, depression rates are lower and recovery rates are higher. Community is the mental health intervention. So what can we do? Start small, but start. Instead of doom scrolling to find yet another thing to be outraged about, call someone you've been meaning to call. Invite a neighbor for tea. Share something you've cooked. Attend a local meeting about housing or schooling. Not to be informed, but to be part of it. Put your phone in another room for 1 hour a day and see what surfaces in your mind. When someone talks, practice really listening instead of waiting to speak. Protect your time not just from corporate demands, but from algorithmic demands. And above all, build routines that honor the fact that you are alive. Sit with your discomfort instead of outsourcing it to a screen. Tell the truth even when it costs you. Go outside for no reason. Sing at the top of your lungs. Read something slowly. There is no technology, no government program, no private sector innovation that will grant you the experience of being present. Only you can decide to reclaim it. It's about remembering that while the cult of the self wants you to be a brand, the part of you that is aware is not a product. It's about seeing consciousness not as a side effect of neurons, but as a shared resource, a strange and beautiful phenomenon that connects you to everyone else who has ever noticed their own heartbeat. If we can learn to live from that place, quietly, stubbornly, together, no algorithm can tell us what we're worth and no system can sell us an exit. We'll already be home. Thanks for clicking this video. I'm building Theorem Noir for people who can feel the pressure to stay distracted and want to practice staying awake. And yes, it's a little ironic doing that on YouTube. The machine sells the problem and hosts the support group. But it's just the start of the journey. If this helped you think, you can help me keep the lights on. Subscribe if you want more. Or just leave a comment with what you noticed in yourself while watching. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Pay attention to your own experience, and I'll see you in the next theorem.